Hello, and welcome to episode 10 of the Dark Money Files, in which we shine a light into a murky world. I am Ray Blake, and with me is my co-host, friend and business partner, Graham Barrow. Hello, Graham.
Hi, Ray.
And what have we got in store for our listeners this week, Graham?
Ray, we're going to talk about the Whistleblower.
Right, which would explain why you asked me to read chapter 9.4.1 of the B&H report, headed Whistleblower Reports from December 2013 through April 2014.
Exactly. And what did you find?
Some interesting information.
Oh, go on.
Well, the initial whistleblower report related to one specific entity, which I think we're going to discuss in a bit more detail later in the podcast.
We are. It was this entity which, completely unknowingly at the time, precipitated my involvement in the whole Danske affair. And it's possible that I know as much, if not more, about this company than, well, pretty much anybody.
Something to look forward to. Back to the whistleblower report. As we mentioned in the last episode, he sent the report to a whole range of people, including a member of the executive board, Baltic Banking, Group Compliance and AML, and Group Internal Audit. What he'd found was that this company was filing false financial statements with Companies House.
So, how did he know they were false, Ray?
Apparently, millions of dollars were flowing through the account in Tallinn at the same time that they were filing a set of dormant accounts at Companies House.
That's a bit of a giveaway, I think.
It gets worse, actually, because another part of the whistleblower's evidence is that after bringing this error to the attention of the branch, an employee of the bank cooperated with the company to fix the error, which caused new accounts to be filed, which were still false.
Oh dear.
The report goes on to say that the customer continued to remain with the branch even though they were aware it had filed false accounts and then filing amended false accounts. The account was eventually closed in September 2013 along with some other associated accounts.
Oh, why was that?
A combination of suspicious payments, insufficient knowledge of the beneficial owners, and because the beneficial owners had been involved with several Russian banks that had been closed down in recent years. Additionally, the whistleblower asserted that the bank had discovered that the beneficial owners included the Putin family and the FSB, which is the Russian Federal Security Service.
Oh, and is that it for the first whistleblower report?
Nope. The whistleblower specifically singled out UK LLPs as being the preferred vehicle for non-resident clients.
Well, Ray, I think I know which LLP this was, and I think I've traced the ownership chain right back to that Russian bank allegedly linked to Vladimir Putin through one of his cousins called Igor.
Wow, that's going to be some story.
It is. The company in question is called Lantana Trade LLP, and I first wrote about it back in October 2017.
Now, why was that, Graham? That was before the whole Danske saga had become the major story it is today.
Yeah, well, it was nothing to do with Danske, Ray. I was actually researching another company called Financial Bridge, which was owned by a guy called Alexander Perepilichnyy, about whom we will undoubtedly do a podcast special sometime soon.
And why is that?
Because it will link Danske Bank, Deutsche Bank, the aforesaid Mr. Perepilichnyy, who died in very odd circumstances in Weybridge in 2012, along with Alexander Litvinenko and Sergei Magnitsky and a whole host of other well-known names.
Wow, that sounds like an unlikely linking together.
Ray, you have no idea.
Okay, well, are you going to explain why you think this LLP is the Danske Bank one?
Yes, so going back to my original article, I found a Russian court case involving both Financial Bridge and Lantana Trade.
Hold on, you're saying that the company that triggered the whole Danske Bank saga, which is owned, allegedly, by a cousin of Vladimir Putin, and members of the Russian Secret Service, was involved in a court case with another company that was run by a guy who was rumoured to have been bumped off by the Russian Secret Service, although we're going to say that a recent inquest found that he died of natural causes.
And that's exactly what I'm saying. The connections are much more than that, but we'll leave those, I think, for our Perepilichnyy special.
Well, okay, but that still hasn't explained why you think it's the one referred to in the Whistleblower report.
No, true. So, when I published that article in October 2017 mentioning Lantana trade, over time two things started to happen. One was that it was read by a lot more people than I could ever have imagined, and actually I checked this morning and it's over 4,000 reads. And two, I started receiving connection requests on LinkedIn from journalists who were investigating the Danske Bank story.
I see. And it was the appearance of Lantana trade in the story that triggered the interest.
Yes. Now, at the time I only included it out of passing interest, but I think a lot of other people who knew rather more than me thought I might have more information than I was letting on.
And from what you said earlier, you do now.
Yeah, so let me tell you what I know about Lantana. First of all, check the company's house records, and Lantana originally filed dormant accounts for the year ending 31st of May 2012.
Which is consistent with the whistleblower's point.
Exactly, and then it filed amended accounts for that year 2 months later.
Which again is consistent with the whistleblower's story. How much profit were they showing in these amended accounts, considering that they were allegedly putting millions through Danske at that time?
Well, the amended accounts, which, by the way, were signed off by my old friend Ali Moulaye, showed commission income for the year of £15,389.
£15,389, which is why the whistleblower asserted that they were still false.
Yes.
So, it meets all the criteria that were identified around transactional behaviour for this mystery company. But what about these links to the Putin family?
Now, that's where the ability to ferret out interesting snippets that are, frankly, hidden in the depths of the internet becomes very handy. Now, so I discovered Igor Putin sat on the board of a little-known bank called Promspur Bank. It had a number of interesting board members, Ray, one of whom was a guy called Alexei Kulikov, who is alleged to have masterminded much of the Deutsche Bank mirror trading, along with our friend Mr. Perepilichnyy, and for which Mr. Kulikov was eventually arrested.
So, before we go any further, Graham, can I just quickly summarise where I think we've got to?
Yeah, because it's pretty complicated, so I think that's a good idea, I do.
You're saying that buried within the whistleblower allegations, there's enough information to link a bank, which has a Putin on the board, to a man who died in strange circumstances in a leafy London suburb, to the Deutsche Bank mirror trades, and to Alexander Litvinenko, who died when somebody put polonium in his tea, allegedly, as well as the whole Danske Bank story.
Yep, that and more, Ray. It is all connected, but that really has to wait for another episode while we finish off the whistleblower story.
Oh, I'm sorry. Carry on.
So, yeah, as a result of my ferreting, I found a spreadsheet, albeit it's pretty much all in Russian, which lists the creditors of Promspur Bank after it went bust around 2015.
And how is your Russian, Graham?
Я не говорю по-русски, Ray.
3:30.
Yeah. No, that is actually Russian for I don't speak Russian, Ray, and probably not very well pronounced, but hey. But my good friend Google Translate was in fact a huge help.
And what did it tell you?
It told me, amongst other things, that Promspur Bank had 4 UK entities as debtors.
One of which was Lantana Trade LLP, no doubt.
Yes, and 2 of the other 3 were also LLPs, and the 4th was, unbelievably, a Scottish limited partnership. So I think we might assume that some or all of these were the associated accounts, maybe, which were also shut down at the same time.
And what do we know about them?
Well, one of them was Ergo Invest LLP, which has been consistently associated with the Deutsche Bank mirror trades, alongside another almost identical LLP called Chadbourg Trade, both of which filed identical accounts for 2012 and 2013, and both of those were signed off by Ali Moulaye. The third LLP was called Westpool Commercial, and intriguingly, it was only dissolved a few months ago, which makes you wonder where it's been banking since.
Well, perhaps one of our listeners can tell us. And who signed their accounts, Graham?
Oh, that would be Ali Moulaye, Ray.
And the Scottish Limited Partnership?
Well, that was called Transnational LP. Because it's a Scottish Limited Partnership, there's very little information on the filings, but it is interesting because it's been dissolved twice.
Twice?
Yeah. It's not a commonly known fact, Ray, but you can't currently wind up a Scottish Limited Partnership. You can dissolve one, but for the price of a stamp and filling in the requisite form, you can reinstate it at any time.
So just because an SLP might appear on Companies House as dissolved, it doesn't mean it's dead and gone forever.
Quite right.
So, as a result of your research, you found out that Lantana Trade behaved in exactly the same way as the entity that the whistleblower described. It has proven links to Promsperbank, which had Igor Putin as a director, which also links it to a number of other UK entities which we might reasonably assume also banked with Danske and which were also filing bogus accounts.
Exactly.
And it was your mention of Lantana Trade in an article you wrote more than 18 months ago, which is really the direct cause of why we embarked on these podcasts.
It was, yeah.
So in a way, we've got the whistleblower to thank for us being here.
We have, and of course we now know his name is Howard Wilkinson, so if you're listening, Howard, thank you.
Well, I think he is, indeed. And returning to the information he provided, it's clear from the B&H report that it set in train a whole sequence of events.
Which were?
The initiation on the 7th of January 2014 of a group internal audit investigation, as well as informing the Executive Board. That was followed 2 days later by a further report from the whistleblower of 3 more customers with, quote, similar irregularities, quotes, and further reports from him in March and April, which also mentioned similar issues with Danish KS companies, which are very similar to UK limited partnerships.
And did Group Internal Audit find anything?
Yes. In a letter of 13th of January, they confirmed some of the whistleblower's allegations, including a lack of documentation at account opening from some customers and the potential for a tipping off having occurred.
Which would tend to support the assertion that someone in the branch had colluded with the client over the fake accounts.
Exactly. Tipping off is when somebody inside discloses to the bad guys that there's an investigation going on. Yeah, so that was the letter we referred to last week that concluded that there was no immediate reason to inform the Estonian FSA.
That's just astonishing.
It is. The investigation rumbled on throughout 2014, with the view slowly taking hold that the non-resident portfolio should be downsized and possibly either closed or sold off. It certainly appears that they stopped onboarding in June 2014.
That's not quite the same as closing down the operation, though.
No, but the report also makes clear that they must have been doing some exiting, as a 30% drop in profits from Estonia is also mentioned.
OK, well, that's reasonably substantial.
Yes, and then came the Estonian FSA report of the 11th of September, following AML visits in June and July.
And?
Well, there are some really quite damning quotes in this report.
Go on then.
OK, here we go. Danske Bank systematically established business relationships with persons in whose activities it is possible to see the simplest and most common suspicious circumstances.
Cheapers.
Yeah, and how about this? We have therefore systematically identified situations during our on-site inspection where Danske Bank's system for monitoring transactions and persons is effectively not working.
Oh, that's about as bad as it gets. I mean, that's actually very similar to the FCA's report on Deutsche Bank.
Yes. The Estonian FSA also voiced the opinion that, quote, economic interests prevail over the obligation to apply enhanced due diligence measures.
Deja vu all over again.
Well, it certainly precipitated a round of communications between members of the board and others within the bank. Some took the report very seriously and felt that the complete shutdown of the non-resident business was the only suitable response.
And others?
Well, the Estonian branch went on the offensive.
Really?
Oh yes, they wrote to the Estonian FSA saying they agreed with one observation, partly agreed with 6 and rejected a further 28.
Oh my word. How did they come to that conclusion?
Well, because they felt that the report was based on circumstances prevailing at the end of 2013, and the improvements they'd made in 2014 largely took care of the problem.
I'm not sure they were right, Ray.
No. The result was that by early 2015 they were writing to the Estonian FSA saying they'd implemented an action plan and that 853 non-resident accounts had been closed, and effectively everything was now fine.
And was it?
On the 9th of February 2015, the Estonian FSA wrote to the branch querying the increase in deposits from non-residents in Q4 2014.
Increase?
Yes, but the branch responded that these were seasonal variations, as 315 of the 853 had been terminated in Q4 2014.
But not 315 of their top earning accounts, obviously.
No. In fact, the consequence of all that activity was that by 9th of June 2015, a chart produced by the Estonian branch showed that they had reduced the non-resident portfolio from 2,890 to 2,569, a decrease of 321 customers.
So the net result of the whistleblower reporting his concerns internally was, to be charitable, only marginal, to say the least.
Or so it appears.
There's more to tell here, but before we do, I'm conscious that we've not really looked at the role of whistleblowing generally in the world of dark money.
No, Graham, we haven't really. Whistleblowers are increasingly common these days. I suppose it goes without saying that they're a force for good in the world.
Yeah, for the most part. Ray, do you want to explain just what a whistleblower is?
Yes, of course. A whistleblower is someone who steps outside of their own organisation's reporting hierarchy to raise an issue they believe cannot or will not be properly dealt with by their immediate bosses in their normal reporting line, for whatever reason.
And what might those reasons be?
Well, it usually comes down to incompetence, complicity, or conflict of interests, all of them either actual or imagined.
So I might choose to whistleblow if I thought my bosses were incapable of dealing with the problem, or they were part of the problem, or that they would somehow benefit in the problem continuing.
Yes, that's about it. And that might be a suspicion you have, or you might have very good evidence that that's the case because, for instance, they've ignored your reports before.
I see. So if you can't report problems to your immediate bosses, you go over their heads.
Yes, you report either to more senior management, or to an independent hotline or body, or to the financial regulator, or some, or all of those.
So there's a risk to you if you decide to do that, though, isn't there?
Well, in most jurisdictions there are legal protections for whistleblowers who act in good faith. In the UK, for instance, there's the Public Interest Disclosure Act of 1998, which means that not only is any wish for anonymity protected, but you're also shielded from any detrimental treatment or reprisals from your employer as a result of your disclosure.
Is that realistic, though?
Well, that's open to question, Graham. Certainly if you go public, I'd say the relationship between you and the employer is not likely to be reparable. Most whistleblowers don't stay in the employ of the firms they report, and they can find it hard to get work with other firms in their industry.
So actually, Ray, whistleblowers really do put themselves at risk one way or another.
Yes, I think that's right, Graham. And also, if your disclosure is found to be malicious or lacking good faith or not in the public interest, those protections don't apply.
So, all in all, whistleblowing is pretty much a last resort. What then are we to make of what seems like a rise in the number of whistleblowers in financial services in recent years?
Nothing good, Graham. It seems to me that this is a sign that firms aren't listening to their own staff, and that rather than acting on their own controls, they are in some cases ignoring them, and in others actively suppressing them.
And thereby creating more and more frustrated people taking increasingly desperate measures to make things right.
Who find that doing the right thing comes at a cost, often in career terms.
Yes, and this is where I think sometimes that the Americans have definitely got the right approach.
In paying whistleblowers, you mean?
Yes, in the US, whistleblowers are paid a proportion of the fines that firms pay for their actions that are revealed by the whistleblower. And while this, I guess, could encourage the wrong behaviours, I think that on balance, compensating the whistleblower for the risk they take for the public good is actually the right thing to do.
I agree with you. Although, of course, if firms do the right thing in the first place, there would be no need for the whistleblowing and the fines at all.
Indeed. So let's get back to Mr. Wilkinson. But actually, sadly, there's not much more to say. Given all the shenanigans we've outlined above, by April 2014, he'd become so disillusioned with the state of affairs that he resigned and moved on.
Hardly suspecting that 5 years later, almost to the day, we'd be sitting recording this podcast about one of the most extraordinary money laundering stories ever to emerge.
Yet.
Yes. We must never forget that. But is that it now, Graham, in these podcasts for Danske Bank?
Ray, I think unless we decide to bore our listeners senseless with a level of minutiae I think even we would find tedious, yes.
Okay, so what's coming up next week?
Well, having already mentioned him a few times this week and previously, I think it's time we allowed our Mr. Moulaye his moment in the spotlight, don't you?
Oh, I'm looking forward to it.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Dark Money Files. We hope you enjoyed it. If you would like to listen to future episodes, please subscribe through iTunes, Spotify, or your normal podcast provider. Thanks.